Good morning again. The YouTube video that you just saw, I think, is a great introduction to our first panel of forum. Safety is always job one for us at TXDOT. It's our focus for every project, from concept all the way to completion. But for all of our efforts, traffic crashes and fatalities keep happening, day after day and year after year. And here's the truly tragic part. We've had at least one traffic fatality in Texas every day since November 7th of the year 2000. So let that sink in for just a moment. November 7th of the year 2000 is the last day in Texas without at least one traffic fatality. Every day for the past 6,634 days straight, someone has lost his or her life in a tragic crash in this state. And it has to stop. But how? How do we end the streak of needless and preventable traffic deaths in this state? And I think the video that we all just saw may be a part of the answer. I've used the video over the last few months to challenge all of us to not get beaten down by the constant drumbeat and to not think that fatalities are inevitable. What if, as the video implied, we stopped thinking and looking at the number of traffic fatalities as just numbers, and we looked at them as real people? What if we treated the next death as not just one more tick in the fatality column, but as someone's mother, someone's father, someone's child, perhaps your mother, your father, or your child? What if every time we got behind the wheel, we remembered that we're not just driving for ourselves, but we're driving for the people that we care most about in this world? If we all did that, maybe, just maybe, we'd put our phones down. We'd ease off the gas. We'd call a cab or an Uber or Lyft if we've been drinking. And we'd always wear our seatbelts. And maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't be talking about traffic fatalities anymore. It's definitely not impossible, and it all starts with you and me. So let's resolve, starting today, that we're going to end the streak of traffic deaths in Texas. It is possible. So this morning, we've asked a panel of guests who are committed to helping us get to that end. And we've asked Doug Bugley with the Houston Chronicle, who recently penned a series of thought-provoking articles about the problem in the state's largest metro area, to lead the panel in that discussion. So as you listen, I ask you to keep one question in mind. What are you willing to do to end the streak of deaths in Texas? And at this time, I'll turn the stage over to the panel and to Doug Bugley.
Thank you. First, let me do a quick round of introductions. Dr. Robert Wunderlich is with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, Center for Transportation Safety. I think everybody can figure out what that does. It is the center in charge of transportation safety. Jay Crossley is with Farm&City, which is a local organization related to urban growth and development, but also rural growth and development, and how those two things are going to interplay here in Texas. And then, of course, Commissioner Laura Ryan with the Texas Transportation Commission. So we can start off. I wanted to make sure that I was very clear out at the outset, and thanks for Director Vass giving an introduction. This is going to be a little bit of an abstract discussion about how do we solve traffic deaths, but these are people. Elizabeth Johansson was driving on I-40 near Shamrock on Thursday, and lost control in wintry conditions. Vehicle slid. Elizabeth, her husband Adam, both 35, and their 10-year-old son were killed. The next day, Vanessa Matlock in Fort Worth went the wrong way on I-30, was killed in a head-on collision. In Dallas, on Saturday, there was an incident where a 32-year-old woman hit another woman head-on. The first woman died. At midnight tonight, there was an incident in Houston where a mother and a baby were both ejected from a vehicle when they hit a light pole. So these are lives, these are people. But Dr. Wunderlich, where do we start to understand this? Where is this trending, and how bad of a problem do we have?
Well, thanks, Doug. If I could have the slides. Yesterday, 10 Texans suffered a violent death from a single cause. And it happened the day before and the day before that. It's probably happening today. It's very likely to happen tomorrow. And yet, they were doing something that you and I did just to get here, traveling from one place to another. So we have over 3,700 deaths in Texas every year, and Doug put a face on those numbers. So that's 10% of the total in the United States. 10% of the traffic fatalities occur in Texas. It's the most of any state, or at least it was in 2017.
Awesome.
All right. And 11% of pedestrian deaths occur of all traffic fatality pedestrian deaths occur in Texas. And we have 8% of the population. What about compared to other causes of death? Up until the age of 35, traffic crashes are the #1 killer of Texans of any disease or accidental deaths, more than firearms, more than poisoning from drugs, more than cancer, more than anything else. In the United States, it ranks first, the teens, which is a real issue, is first in the United States too. And then as we get older, other causes of death, such as disease, start to take over. But even in the ages of from 35 to 64, it's the 8th most prevalent cause of all deaths, but the 2nd most prevalent cause of accidental death. And in the United States, it's much less. And then once we get to 65, other things take over, other causes of death. And so what's the trend been? Well, we started out if you start in 2001, we had about 3,700 deaths a year, and then it was going up slightly, and then around 2007, 2008, 2009, started dropping precipitously. And this was really a great cause for joy. But there was something else that went along in that period. Perhaps you remember it. It was called the Great Recession. And so we traveled a little less, but actually our risk went down. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And around 2011 or so, it bottomed out. And since that time, there's been a steady increase. And unfortunately, we're right back where we started in the year 2001. What was the trend in the United States during this period? Well, we were actually doing a little better than the United States as a whole during the early 2000s. Then that precipitous drop associated with the recession happened, and again, we see the rising number of fatalities as the economy recovered. So what are the key components of traffic fatalities? Well, they're based on exposure and risk. And exposure is about how much we drive, and we usually measure that as vehicle miles of travel. And the risk is the likelihood that we would have a fatality per any unit of that travel. Now, this is like getting the flu. Did any of you have the flu? Good, nobody's hand went up, because I know we're gonna send you home. So if we all go shake hands with him, that's our exposure, right? So if we all go shake hands, or if we meet 100 people that have the flu, and I meet 10 and you meet 100, your exposure is higher than mine. Likewise, I may be less susceptible to the flu than someone else, or you might have a greater susceptibility. That's our risk. Maybe some of that has our behaviors. What if we wash our hands after we meet this gentleman? Well, then we've lowered our risk. The same thing is true with traffic fatalities. And in order to reduce fatalities, we've either got to reduce exposure, or we've got to reduce risk, or we've got to reduce them both. There's no other way around it. There's not a magic wand, there's no silver bullets. We've either got to travel less, or we've got to reduce our risk. One of the things that Mr. Bass was talking about, how can we reduce our risk? Put your seatbelt on and reduce the chance of fatality by about half. Even though we have more than 90% of people in Texas during daytime wearing their seatbelts, over half of fatalities still are unbelted. We can drive undistracted. We still have about 35% that are impaired that are related to impaired drinking. We can reduce risk. And we've really got three critical elements that we can deal with. We've got the roadway, we've got the people, the users, the pedestrians, the bicyclists, the drivers, and we've got vehicles. These are the three elements that we've got to work with if we're going to reduce traffic fatalities. And what can we do with them? Well, we've got some tools. The tools are engineering. Of course, TXDOT is one of the ones that applies the tool of engineering. We've got education, so we can make people understand what their risks are. And then we've got enforcement and what I call enactment. Because before you can have enforcement, you have to enact a law that governs the behavior or sets the social norm, right? So those are the four tools that we've got to work with. So if we want safer roads, we're going to have to do something to improve the safety performance of roadways. And there's lots of great research and evidence these days that says these things, if we do them, if we design roads this way, if we put these countermeasures in place, we can reduce risk, that people perform better on roadways if we do certain things. And then we can mitigate crash consequences. That means if you have a crash, maybe you hit a guardrail that's a forgiving guardrail, or the pole that this person hit would have broken away instead of being fixed object. So those are ways to engineer. And we can also educate. We can educate ourselves as professionals into the techniques that will, in fact, reduce risk. And we probably got some work to do on that. And maybe not look at the traditional ways we've done and what are some new ways that we can do it. In terms of safer drivers, one of the big things is education. We want people to reduce their own risk. That's what Mr. Bass was talking about. How can we as individuals reduce our own risk? Because if I reduce my risk, and Commissioner Ryan reduces her risk, and Jay reduces his risk, and Doug reduces our risk, we've collectively reduced everyone's risk. And so there's an idea that it starts with us as an individual user of the system, and we've got to make people aware of that. And then we promote a safety culture where we recognize that not only am I talking about myself and my own risk, but I'm talking about their risk and your risk. And together we can lower everyone's risk. We enact laws to establish social norms and consequences. And then we get our friends with the sirens and the lights and to enforce it. So we have to have laws that tell us this is the norm, and then we have to have people to enforce it when people forget that that's the way they should behave. And finally, safer vehicles. And a lot of emphasis has been put on safer vehicles. Self-driving cars. Well, if people are so bad at it, why don't we have them drive themselves? Well, probably not ready for prime time. But many, many advances have been made in vehicles over the years, particularly in the area of crashworthiness. And what that means is that you're more likely to survive a crash in a modern car than an older car because of airbags, because they're designed with crumple zones, because they also have advanced safety features, and we're seeing more and more of these, like automatic braking and lane centering, which puts you in the center of the lane, helps you maintain your position with the lane. Electronic stability control has reduced rollover crashes. So there's a lot of things, and those become, the technology's there. But right now, automatic braking is penetrated in about 2% of the fleet. So we've got a long way to go before that reduces risk in the manner that we would like. And so where do we start trying to reduce risk? And I think you might hear from one of the panelists that maybe we should reduce our exposure, and there are ways to do that as well. But how do we work both sides of the equation, or at least work the side of the equation that says risk? Well, about a year and a half ago, under the sponsorship of TXDOT, we worked together to develop a Texas Strategic Highway Safety Plan. It's called Texas Together on the Road to Zero. And it involved a great range of stakeholders. Jay Crossley was part of this effort, who's a safety advocate. We had planners, we had engineers, we had people from the public, we had people that work in the traffic safety area from across the state come together, and what we identified was 7 emphasis areas, and those are shown in the pictures: distracted driving, impaired driving, intersection crashes, older users, pedestrians and bicyclists, run off the road crashes, and speeding. And for each of those 7 emphasis areas, we developed a number of strategies and countermeasures and action plans. But we can have a great plan, and it is a great plan. And there are lots of great ideas about it, but it takes someone to put them on the ground. It takes TXDOT, which is doing a fabulous job in promoting new ways to improve safety. It takes people in cities, it takes advocates, it takes us all working together. We've got to take this plan and put it as reality. So if you're interested in this, I encourage you to go to texashsp.com and find out more about the countermeasures and what you or your agency or your firm can do to improve safety in Texas. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Now, if we could drill a little bit deeper in terms of, let's break down, what is it that Texas, and specifically TXDOT, is doing, Commissioner Ryan, do you think advance us on the way to fewer fatalities?
Where to begin? I think it starts in everything that we do. Safety's key to TXDOT. We look at engineering. We look at every letting that we have. When we do a project, we break that down to what component of that project has a safety impact. Is it rumble strips? Is it wider shoulders? What types of engineering? There are engineering materials that are looked at and piloted. So we track the dollars that we spend. We have a safety education program and a division, and that's approved on an annual basis by the commission and then looked at daily, and we partner with other agencies within the state. There are things that we also do to involve the community. There are specific times of the year that are obviously higher proponents to death, and we try to get out in the communities to make it real. And I don't know how else to put it. I think studies and are great and plans are great, but until it impacts everyone in this room and you all decide you're gonna go impact somebody else, none of those things will matter. So we try now to get that out as well as awareness too.
Is a lot of that communication simply the fact that getting past what Deborah Hersman with the National Safety Council told me, that she thought there was a cultural novocaine to driving in America, and the fact that we don't see the risk. Whether it's because our cars are more insulated, and the fact that we don't hear the noise outside, or just the fact that we do it so routinely. How do you break through in a modern era with Twitter, with YouTube, which, by the way, if you have not checked out, if you need to see Dr. Wunderlich's presentation again, it is fantastically done on YouTube. But how do we get
I gave him
past...
$20.
And the sad thing is that it only costs $20. How do we get past that to get people to understand their role in it? And then how do we get them to communicate the expectation they have for you all to do your end of the bargain?
That's a great question. If I had the answer, we probably wouldn't be talking about this, right? I think it has to get real. I thought about the questions or the presentations earlier, and we heard a lot of words, transparency. You've heard accountability. You've heard responsibility. You've heard, it's interesting, the discussion that just happened about 6 layers before the president said something. I think the reality is that we have to remove those layers and truly understand what was said. These are lives. I was driving back from Dallas right before the holidays, and on the service road coming out of a shopping area, a car, I can't tell you what caused it, but a SUV literally did 3 flips as I was driving and then crashed. I couldn't stop. I was on 45 right in the Conroe area. I don't know if that was a death. I can tell you it was definitely a serious injury. I think we've become, the Novocaine is perfect. When plane crashes occur, and I used this a couple months ago with the Southwest crash and death, it was the first fatality in 9 years, and it was all over the place. And yet, I don't know how many people knew the names of the people that Doug talked about a few minutes ago, but we don't pay attention anymore, and we have to. So part of the awareness is this. It is everybody, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, and without discomfort, things will not change. So I think the biggest impact is we have to get a lot more uncomfortable with the issue.
That level of discomfort, oftentimes people will have different solutions or different points of view. I know if you talk to the bicycling community, they have a lot of solutions. If you talk to the automobile community, some of the solutions that the bicycling community would like are anathema to their interest in moving in some cases. And Jay, you're in sort of a nexus of all of those interests. Is there something that everyone agrees upon, you think?
Well, I think, yes, all of us, one way to look at it is, you know, if I ask all of you how many people should die in Texas transportation system every year, you'll all come up, you'll try to think about some scientific method to think about what the right number is. You know, is the right number 33,700? If I then ask you how many members of your family should die in the Texas transportation system next year, all of you will certainly say 0. And that is 0 people who are walking, 0 people and then killed, 0 people who are riding their bike and killed, 0 people who are in cars. Most of our kids who die are dying in cars. And so I think that is something we can bring together, and I think we shouldn't talk about drivers, and I don't think my good friends in the bicycle community shouldn't talk about bicycles so much. It's all of us using this transportation system together, and we need to have a much higher priority of all of us getting home safely at the end of the day.
One of the things that always competes with that, though, is efficiency and speed and economics. Speed is clearly one of the problems that leads to our fatalities. The faster the vehicle is going, or the driver is allowing the vehicle to go, the more damaging that crash can be done. But let's dive into that a little bit in terms of, is there a way to lower speeds without taking 2 minutes off of my commute? Like those do seem to be in conflict.
Can I
Well,
I was going to ask.
you know, we tend to race from one traffic signal to the next, and then we wait, and then, or we're on the freeway in the rush hour, and we rush from one congested location to another. You know, perhaps if we could demonstrate that slow and steady beats fast and stopping, and fast and stop, we'll have some success. The speed is one of the challenges, because we make this calculation individually about our time utility every time we get in a car, and it's like now our cars are becoming more social places, I guess, and that's one of the problems, right? So you can continue your work and then you're distracted. But we're in our car, we want to be from one place to another, and we want to minimize that time. And yet we know that if we increase our speeds, that the risk is. But we know about our time, and that happens every time, and crashes are still rare on an individual level. And that's one of the problems about the awareness, is that the chance of any one of us being in a crash, or the likelihood, is not that great. Collectively, it's very high, as we saw from the statistics at the beginning. But we've got to figure out a way to make a bargain with people that says, you know, if we're a little more civil on the road and we're a little slower on the road, we still can get where we want to get in a reasonable amount of time and not put other people at risk. And that is a great engineering, a great social challenge, a great education challenge that I don't have all the answers to, but I know is key to reducing speeds. Finding ways that, and the other thing is finding ways that actually encourage timing traffic signals a little bit differently, so that it encourages slow but steady, and yet minimizing the number of stops you have to make.
I'd go a little farther and say that, speed is really one of the core issues, and the nationwide, the acronyms have come around, and the NHTSA, US.DOT, NACTO, AASHTO, all have been talking more and more that speed is a much bigger problem than we thought, and we have to design for safe speeds. And the NACTO says any surface street in an urban area, you should not design for more than 35 miles an hour. No question about it. That would include feeder roads. And AASHTO Green Book, the new Green Book, doesn't disagree with that kind of idea. And so if you think about a Burnett Road here in Austin, that road is designed, the design speed is 75, 80 miles an hour. The posted speed is 45. Bright young kid died there trying to cross the street a couple years ago. And if you look at, during rush hour, the speed you can travel from one end of Burnett Road to the other end of Burnett Road is 20 miles an hour. And so like we say with drunk driving, is it worth it? So is it worth it to design Burnett Road for this fantasy of high speed? And that kid's gone, and so we have to change the design so it doesn't, currently on a road like Burnett or Westheimer in Houston, it feels uncomfortable to drive anywhere close to 30 miles an hour. And it's not that Texans are jerks and have a heavy foot. The streets are designed to encourage us to drive fast, and we have to deal with that. We have to change our streets and retrofit them to be safe.
But if you narrow those lanes, you're also adding to risk. You're adding to, yes, you're putting in a narrower lane or a median or something that is going to then be one more thing that makes it more likely for a collision to occur, for somebody to clip a median, for someone to accidentally bump the very, very large truck next to them.
2.1, in general, though, lanes narrower than 12 feet are safer in an urban setting. But 2, I'm not a traffic engineer, and I want engineers to figure this out. I want to ask the engineers the right questions. The right question is, how can no one die on Westheimer? And maybe the answer, the engineers can figure it out. And my favorite example is the 12-foot chicken. That if you put a giant purple chicken on the side of the road, everyone will drive a little slower. More importantly, if you put trees and people, everyone drives slower if there are people on a street. And so there are ways to do this. But if you make it seem like you're in a gutter, everyone drives fast. So the key is that I don't want to tell you exactly what to do for Burnett Road. I want some engineers to figure it out.
Are you telling them to figure it out?
Yes. I think that I can assure you that it's being looked at. Can we find the solution that does exactly what you said, 0 deaths? I got in trouble for saying this before, but it's never stopped me. No, we cannot engineer safety, the roads to be safe enough, right? We can continue to improve. We can add technology, we can add sidewalks, we can keep medians there, we can put rumble strips up, we can use reflectives, we can use more sticky surfaces on curves. But you have freight, you have larger trucks, we have all sorts of things that also have to be taken into consideration. The one thing that I found interesting just this morning that was discussed a few minutes ago is that people drive at 75 because they're designed. But this posted speed limit's 45. I think one of the things that was an aha for me when I got probably engaged later than I should, and I will admittedly say there was an aha for me this year, but 94% of the fatalities are controllable features. They're human behaviors that we can decide to change. We make a choice. We make it, when the posted speed limit says 45, how many of us have ever driven more than 45? Well, I'll raise my hand, right? And anyone that doesn't is probably not being honest, right? There's that lack of transparency. Drive 45. So the behaviors that we all control make a huge impact. And if we could start there, Then I think we add the engineering, we add the other types of things, and that's how we get closer. But I personally want to state that I think the engineering, you know, if we put it in that bucket, we won't get there. The transparency part is 94% are controllable. Slow down. Do the speed limit, to your point. Steady wins the race. You'll get there at 45 miles an hour, but it might take you 5 extra minutes.
Well, I think one of the things is, because Jay just handed me a challenge and a rubber chicken or something, I think, as a traffic engineer.
Purple chicken.
Purple chicken,
Purple.
I'm sorry.
I like that.
And the thing about it is we haven't found the silver bullet on speed yet. I mean, Jay makes a great point, but how do you go back and change? And I'm not sure that we know exactly how to do that yet. So some experimentation really has to occur. You know, cities like Austin and San Antonio are starting to do innovative things, and that's the laboratory generally where things happen like that. And we need to do more exploration of ways that we can. The first thing is to say, first thing we need is some will to say, we really want Burnett Road to operate slower. And there has to be some will and some cover for the traffic engineer to say, I'm not just going to get out in front and say it's 35 and then answer phone calls for the rest of my life about, because I was a traffic engineer in Austin once, and trust me, they do call. And you know,
It's
why
okay
is it
if
now?
you designed Burnett Road, sir.
No, I did not do that. I'm not quite that old, almost, but not quite that old. One of the points I want to make is that a lot of times people come into the discussion about safety, and we see this, and no matter what your professional background or your personal one, and they figured out what everyone else needs to do in order to do it. And so a safety advocate may say, well, it's up to the traffic engineers. And the traffic engineers say, hey, you know, I built a pretty decent road out here. Why can't you use it safely? And this person might say that. And what we need to stop for a moment and say is, what can I do? What can I do as an individual, which is what we talked about. We know what we can do as an individual to do this. What can I do as a traffic engineer? What are the parts of the system? You know, I talked about there's 3 parts of it. And so if I'm a traffic engineer and I say, well, it's all about vehicles and all about people's behavior, then I'm really saying, well, there's nothing I can do. And that's not true. There is something I can do. That there is plenty of resources available that says, if you do this, you can make this a safer roadway. And in terms of enacting laws and saying that, we need to decide as a society what it is, and we need to, in whatever role we're in, and you know, we have a different role. We have a commissioner, and we have, I guess, an advocate, and we have an engineer. And if we each say, you know, what is it that I personally can do, and what is it that I can do as a professional to do that, we might get somewhere. You know, you said, how do we get people aware of it? Well, we ought to just take it upon ourselves. You know, I've kind of decided, I don't know, it's so sensational when an airliner goes down, or a bus crashes, or a train crashes, and you get all kinds of, and yet the 10 people that died, you know, you knew about it because you researched it, right? But if you're not touched individually by that, you're not touched. Somehow the sensational gets it. But that doesn't mean that we as individuals and professionals can't take it upon ourselves to say, hey, I know this is a problem. What is it that I can do? What is it that I can do?
Is there a way then to empower everyone across that whole spectrum to whether, and I know that oftentimes empowerment means money, but to encourage a culture where engineers are able to make the best decision for each of those settings? Because obviously the solution of putting people on a freeway is not going to slow down streets is not going to be good for the freeway, but it would be great for local streets. Enforcement can be empowered by telling people that we're in a community, we are going to make a priority of writing tickets, but then police get complaints because they're writing tickets. So is there a culture, or do we need to have certain things done, including enactment by the legislature, to empower each of those legs of the stool to do their role in cooperation with the other features?
you opened up what I was going to say. Is that one of the things we need is clear leadership from the legislature and the governor, and we as a people, all of us need to understand how big of a problem this is. And if you compare the cost of congestion, the TTI report every year, total it up, the cost of congestions for Texans is about $14 billion a year, $500 a person. If you then look at the comprehensive costs of crashes on Texans, it's about $99 billion. It's a much bigger problem. And so the same as we have had leadership on issues like congestion, we need leadership on safety. We need a goal. We need to say, we, the people of Texas, are going to end traffic deaths. And we're going to empower every engineer all the way down the line at TXDOT to do that. And when they're making every single little decision, they have the support of the leadership to decide we're going to make these choices to end traffic deaths. And Texas is now starting to be one of the few states that doesn't have such a goal. A Vision Zero or toward zero deaths traffic goal. So I think that's a key that we need to recognize the breadth of this problem.
Matt, I think it's, I don't think we've gotten, obviously, to where we want to be, but I can assure you that every engineer at TXDOT is empowered to do what they need to do and bring the awareness up on safety. Have we found the answers yet? I think the answer is no, but I can assure you that it is front and center, that it is thought about, looked at, and then analyzed. Again, the outcome is not what we want it to be. I think you said, can it be more? It can be more. But that is there. We just have not made the impact that we need to make it.
Does it require deviation, though? And I guess what maybe I'm thinking more in terms of the local officials, but in Houston, for example, sometimes the thing you can do to create a safer environment, say a roundabout. Roundabouts in many communities are safer. Fort Bend County has many of them, and they are moving traffic efficiently, and there's a belief that they are simply safer than crossways intersections. But in order to do a roundabout, say in the city of Houston or in some other municipalities, you have to ask for permission to do the roundabout as opposed to the roundabout being the norm. Do those levels of empowerment need to change to get us to a safer place?
Well, I can tell you that in a previous life, I worked for a municipality in Texas, and I put a roundabout in to improve safety. And in the
you were tarred and feathered.
I was tarred and feathered, bound, gagged. But I had, and here's the important thing, I had a councilman whose district it happened to be that believed that it was the right thing to do. And he had as much fortitude as I've ever seen to sort of resist it and basically have my back on it. And so when you talk about empowerment, sometimes, yeah, I think I agree that it takes someone that kind of will fade the heat a little bit. Because I think in many circumstances, we probably would have taken it out. We had 47 crashes at this particular location. This is a fairly low volume roadway, 8,000 cars a day in the 5 years prior, and in the 5 years after, zero. And so there are things you can do, but it was extremely unpopular. And when I say unpopular, I mean like viscerally unpopular. But I had backing. And it still exists today. It's still doing the job. And so, you know, a lot of things with safety are going to be new, you know, particularly the purple chicken. So that's new, right? And, you know, I like purple chickens as much as the next guy, but some people may not. 12 foot, it's got to be 12 foot. And so, you know, when you try something new and when you do something new, it is often met with resistance just because it's new. You know, there were a lot of people that said Texans can't drive roundabouts. I happen to think that Texans actually can drive roundabouts, and we're finding that in Fort Bend County, we're finding that in other places. But when it is new, people are reluctant. You know, engineers are fairly conservative people, for example. you need to be able to do it. And I'm not saying we don't have permission to do those things, but it's new, and it's new for certain agencies too. These are new things to do, and so, but they're proven. It's not some people say that roundabouts are safer.
They are.
They are safer.
Right.
And because they reduce speeds.
Once society gets used to them, at least.
Yeah, well,
But no, that's part
no.
of-
Even when they screw up, and it's not, the consequences are less because they're driving slower and the collisions are not right angles. They're glancing blows now. And so it's very rare to have a serious crash, even when people are not using them right. And so during the period, so it's, if you're in a learning process about it, it still works better automatically than some of our other options.
I think that this is a really good example where TXDOT deserves some credit, and I always try to make the point, there's TXDOT staff and city, county, MPO staff are doing amazing work every day to save lives on Texas roads. We just need more, and they need support and leadership. And so an example is 51st Street right here in Austin at I-35. That roundabout is, I've driven through it, rode a bike through it, rode a scooter through it, and walked through it, and it feels weird, but from my knowing what I know, it's beautiful, and and I think it seems to me that what TXDOT was doing is we're going to do this here and see if people can deal with this, and so people, you need to deal with it, and we need leaders to be strong and allow TXDOT to do a lot more of those, so.
Are there things, as we begin the legislative session, that you think are going to be part of this safety discussion, whether it's changing the source of funding, of how funding is being done, or where safety is prioritized over congestion, over maintenance, but also, there is likely going to be a bill, if it hasn't been filed already, to drop the prima facie speed on city streets. There will be a bill filed to outlaw any cellular phone use while driving. But some of those things are going to run into opposition from drivers, they're going to run into opposition from other lawmakers. Can we wrap all of those into one discussion? Can they be done individually and still get through what could be a very chaotic session for very specific points on tax relief and tax reform?
I certainly can't speak for what they're going to do. I think that you just said something that kind of got a reaction internally out of me, and it's over, right? Does safety become a priority over this or over that? I think that's where we get into the conflicts and we get nothing done. Why does it have to be over? Why can't it be a part of? Why can't we find a way to do all these things together? Because I think that's the answer. Because then everybody wins. When we become a discussion of this or that, we end up where we're at. We have nothing. I think that, the other piece to this is maybe legislation does occur to drop speeds, to no longer use cell phones while you're in a car in Texas. Doesn't mean that we are going to abide by it. It goes back to everybody has to take responsibility for their own actions and everyone around them. And finding that balance is it enforcement? Is it education? Is it engineering? It's all of it. We won't be able to pick one and I think hit the goal that we all want, and that's 0 deaths on Texas roads. So that's where I would encourage our focus to be.
This is going to be my 4th session of being the little nonprofit trying to get some safety things more attention at the legislature, and so we've tried some various ways, and I'm very happy that there will be a Vision Zero bill, and I think it's done in the right way, which is that it really has no teeth, and the bill would say the legislature asks TXDOT to lead a process to get to zero and to figure it out. And we're not going, the advocates like me aren't going to tell you how to do it. But we want the legislature to say this is important, and we want to make it a priority to figure it out, along with all our other priorities. So I'm pretty confident about that bill. It did pass the Senate Transportation Committee last time, slightly different form. The Safe Neighborhood Streets bill did also pass the Senate Transportation Committee last time, and that would allow this experimentation that Robert talked about, that at 20 miles an hour, if you're driving a car and you hit a pedestrian or a kid, they have a 95% chance of surviving. When you get to 40 miles an hour, they have pretty much a 90% chance of dying. And so the spread between 20 and 40 is extremely important, and especially for me on our little residential streets. If you look at kids who died in Texas or were seriously injured while walking or biking, the most of them died while on a 30-mile-per-hour street, on our little streets. And so the Safe Neighborhood Streets bill would allow cities to design 20-mile-an-hour streets, which they're currently not really allowed to do. Well, there's some debate between Houston and Austin transportation departments about whether or not allowed, but they're not doing it. And so the Safe Neighborhood Streets bill is a crucial bill. Hands-free Texas is crucial. It's insane that it's legal to drive a 3,000-pound dangerous vehicle while you're actually looking at a phone. And we also have a stop for pedestrians. We're a yield to pedestrian state, and it's not working out very well. We have a very big pedestrian death problem. And so we want to change 2 words and become a stop for pedestrian state. That does 2 things. It will hopefully save a lot of lives, but it also makes it very clear of what happened. Our current yield 2 leads to a lot of fuzzy logic, which leads to a family whose loved one died, and these court cases go on for 2 years, and the DA says we can't really figure out, we can't charge anything. And so stop forward makes it very clear. Did you stop for that pedestrian? And the final bill we're pushing is the crash not accident, that following the guidance of the National Highway Transportation Safety Board 20 years ago, we have to stop calling them accidents. Most of them, like you say, there's a known user error involved. Is it a third drunk driving? That's not an accident. People made choices and killed somebody. So it's a crash. So we hope there's going to be a bill just to change every single instance of the word accident in the Texas Transportation Code to crash. And so I think there can be good stuff. And the reason I'm sort of confident that I think we can have some meaningful sort of middle-of-the-road things is I didn't tell you what I really want. And what I really want is money, and I want to pay for these things. The Strategic Highway Safety Plan is a beautiful piece of work that cities, counties, transit agencies, toll road agencies, people across the state contributed to. A long series of countermeasures. TXDOT, the Highway Safety Improvement Plan, is about $300 million a year to implement things from that plan. Most of it goes to TXDOT's districts. And so it's essentially an unfunded mandate for all the things that our cities and counties and transit agencies and toll road authorities could do. So I think we need to match, I think we need to double that. Like earlier as discussed, clearly we should add about 5 cents at least to the gas tax, and I believe it should be targeted, that a penny for safety, a penny for schools to pay for the governor's property tax relief, a penny for maintenance of our roads we have today, and maybe then a penny for congestion. And that would be a balanced approach to give Texans what we need. I don't have a lot of hope on that one, but it's clearly what should happen.
Is there something to be learned from simply shame, in the sense that if, as users go about their day in driving, I know I'm old enough to remember Mothers Against Drunk Driving had a very effective campaign where they toughened laws, but they also shamed drunk drivers in some cases. They made that an issue. They made that something that people were aware of. Seatbelt laws are indoctrinated. I can't tell you how many people I talk to that talk about their child reminds them to buckle up, or that their child used to remind them to buckle up, so that it becomes almost rote. It's education, but using it to say that this is not an acceptable activity. With some of the actions of drivers, whether it's drunk driving, impaired, or drugged driving, which Texas leads the nation in both, distracted driving use, I will not say the gentleman's license plate because I'm afraid of getting sued, but the guy who ate a hoagie next to me on Loop 610 the other day may be an example. There are things that we should simply, as other drivers, not be accepting of. But how do we get that communicated?
I think it starts with the things we're doing today, right? Again, the question is, when we go to shame, do we shame a driver? I'm not stating it's right or wrong. I'm not against it or for it necessarily, but it starts with we obviously feel that we need to change behavior, right? And I think the decision that we all say we need to change behavior, then it's what behaviors need to be changed. And then the next steps are, what is the outcome and the consequence if you don't change behavior? And I think there's a formula to this, that we can't go to the extreme of one end before we decide what it is we want to do. And I think what we're hearing is we need and want to change everybody's behavior. Some of it may be shame, some of it, and then is it dollars, is it awareness? Internet, social media has a great impact, right? You may not put the gentleman's license plate, but just creating the awareness that, hey, I saw this. Put that out on social media. Get people talking. We underestimate the power of one. Start talking about it. And I think I drove down 290.
I thought about it, but I couldn't text and drive to get the photo.
Once you stop, right? I don't mean at the moment. Let me clarify. I didn't realize I had to clarify. Let me clarify that. Not at the moment should you put it on social media. Pull over if you have the immediate urge.
I considered it,
Okay.
and I realized that.
But once you get back home, talk about it. Make it awareness. That's how Mothers Against Driving changed. That's why our kids don't do drugs because of DARE, right? They talk about it. They create awareness.
There are probably enough people in the audience that have gray hair and gray beards like me that remember that when they started their careers in office buildings, people smoked inside, which is, I know you young people are like, what? And and so it was a thing. And then people started to recognize that there were consequences for those that chose not to. I'm not trying to say it's good or bad, but there were consequences for the people that were not smokers from the people that were. And so you saw this gradual transformation from, okay, you can smoke anywhere, to you can smoke in an individual office, to we're going to give you a designated spot, to you are now shamed out to
Right.
the smoking thing. And the society has completely changed. It hasn't eliminated it even then, and that happened over a long time. And we do a lot of surveys across the state. One of the surveys is about cellular device use. And it's interesting is that people don't perceive talking on the phone and driving as being a risk, and they do it. They do perceive texting and driving as a risk, and they do it anyway.
Right.
And so at what point in time do we as a collective society say, the consequences from you taking care of your habit, which I think smoking and texting seem to be habitual, at what point in time does your doing that, the impact on everybody else becomes such that we say, you can't do that anymore, that we look down upon, or you're not going to expose other people to that. And that's, I think, something that we as a society have to, but again, even though we may not have a full texting ban or something, there's nobody saying you have to do it, right? Nobody's making us do that. So there's this combination. I think we get back to, there's the three elements involved. We're not going to get it just by engineering. We're not going to get it just by doing safer roads. We're not going to get there for a long time just because vehicles get better, although better vehicles are really part of it. We're going to have to do something about our behaviors. And we either get it ourselves and start just practicing that, or there's an encouragement from a law that says, yeah, we're really telling you now that's not acceptable anymore, and we're going to enforce it.
Is one of those things, and I'll just sort of set up Jay here because I think I know the answer. We can, just like I always think of the Onion headline that says 98% of people think you should be taking the bus to relieve congestion. As you pointed out in your presentation, we can lower our risk by just simply not being behind the wheel. Is there a role that has in solving our fatalities by developing communities that make it so that I don't need to drive?
Yeah, so I'll be giving an hour-long lecture about vehicle miles traveled later tonight, but the quick version is yes. You know, talking about smoking, when you look at millennials, you know, there still are plenty of people. There's maybe half of millennials want to drive a SUV in the suburbs, but half of them don't. And many people don't want to drive at all. And the best way not to drive drunk is not to drive. And we don't provide those options to Texans. If you are growing up in Texas, you don't have the freedom that you have in other American cities. And so we desperately need the Department of Transportation to be allowed to be given the resources and the ability to build safe transportation options for people. And I think we have to bring down the vehicle miles traveled. And the fact of the matter is that the vehicle miles traveled per capita has been falling in the last 2 decades in Texas. As Harris County and this county and Dallas County grow, people are driving less. And I think it's 2 miles less a day over the last decade or so. That's a huge amount of lives were saved just by that people don't have to drive as much. And so you know, someday, in 25 years, no one will be allowed to drive because it's clearly stupid to allow humans to drive vehicles. But
Yeah, but I'm not really ready to trust Twitter either.
But we can do real things to give people real options now, and the kids want it. And it turns out it would be a lot safer if we let them do that.
Well, and Jay and I have had more than one discussion about this. And like I said, that is one of the, you can reduce vehicle miles, but if you transfer that to another mode and you don't reduce the risk for that mode, and the fastest growing safety issue we have in Texas is pedestrian deaths. And I mean, we're talking nearly 700 a year. And when you have growth, and the growth, it shouldn't be surprising, the growth in Texas is in urban areas. In fact, we're a very urbanized state, something that most people outside of Texas don't realize. But we've got a lot of growth in the urban area, and that is where people walk. The walking is in the urban area. And we've got growth in vehicle miles still, even though it may be going down on per capita, we've got enough growth where it's still going up. And we got more people walking, and we get more people killed. We have got to find ways to mitigate the risk for pedestrians. Now, it turns out that being a drunk pedestrian is not any better than being a drunk driver, because in fact, it's more in pedestrian fatalities, it's more likely for the person, if there is drug or impairment issues, it's more likely to be the pedestrian. And so we've got to find ways that we don't expose people to that high risk if they become pedestrians. And all for walking, I walked here to this session, not from College Station, but down from my room. And but we're all pedestrians at some point in time, even on the road, if we park somewhere, if we go, and we've got to find a way to do that. So we've got to be very careful about that we don't just advocate a change in mode without a coincidental and deliberate attempt to lower risk. And we have ways to do that. Austin is a good example of, they've done a lot of work with either traffic control devices or trying to create environments where pedestrians are at less risk. And we've got to do that at the same time.
I mean, we should make Texas safe to walk, bike, ride a train or a bus, or drive a car.
Absolutely.
All of these things should be our biggest goal. But one of the things I've always made clear is, say to all my friends in the bike advocacy, all my friends in spandex, that it's crucial that we're talking about the total deaths. We want to reduce the amount of people dying, and that if I could take away all your cars, and you all had to walk everywhere you went. Well, it doesn't work if I say you, but we might, we might have more people dying as pedestrians, but if we have less total deaths, if you're walking down a street, you are not doing a dangerous thing. I mean, maybe if you're drunk, but it's the dangerous thing is if a person driving a car hits you. And so I think it's complex, and we have to reduce the total. And I could imagine a transition period where more people die riding bicycles, and I'm okay with that if less people die.
So I think, if I can add, I think one thing we all agree on is we want less deaths. I think that, as Chairman Bug mentioned earlier, I think it was 500 billion lane miles are driven 540 are driven daily. So to get that to zero on any given day, I think we've got a better shot of eliminating deaths than to get that 540 billion down. But again, and I probably maybe sound like I'm beating a drum here, but of the deaths last year, half of them were two things: distracted driving, staying in your lane, drunk and impaired driving, 50%. So we could start there, right? I guess one of the things I'd like to walk out of this session with is there's legislation coming up, there's engineering things, there's things we can do better, but every one of us can walk out today and do something that's going to impact this evening and tomorrow. And that 50% should be our first goal, in my opinion. And that is controllable, it's immediate, it's actionable, and it's measurable. And last time I checked, those are pretty good ways to set objectives. And if that's our goal, then I think that's something we should focus on today and work with tomorrow and the next day in session.
I guess this is sort of a closing question, because as much as I'm keeping you from chicken, you are keeping me from chicken.
Purple, 12 foot?
12 foot, exactly. TXDOT has at its core and a message of safety. Do you think that needs to change? Should that change? How that message is conveyed? And the other thing I will say is that I know that safety message is inherent in the first thing out, because I know where the defibrillators are at the DeWitt Greer building from watching the meetings. But is that communicated? How do you move that from a TTC meeting and a TXDOT meeting to the street? Is that the changeable message signs? Is that in the street ribbons? I mean, how do we take it to the next step?
Interesting question, and we started it with End of Streak. When November comes around, I mean, how many of you know November is the End of Streak month? Yeah, not nearly enough hands. It's 1 month, right? But it truly is the umbrella for all of our safety pillars, because it's to end deaths. What was interesting is that campaign's been going on in education for several years. But how many of you, well, everyone in this room probably does, but most of my friends don't follow TXDOT Twitter or are on TXDOT Facebook, right? But they're on mine. And again, it goes back to what I said, the educational messages, TXDOT can create them, everyone has to expand them, and that doesn't happen. It is not TXDOT's responsibility, and even if it is, we're not capable of reaching every Texan. But everybody in here can reach 50 people around them. It is everybody's circle of influence. So I think it's our responsibility to come up, create, and promote, but everyone in here has to then take that education responsibility so that we can get it. Bob Kaufman agrees. Right. And that's what we ask, right? If I get asked a lot what TXDOT can do for Texas. I'm going to ask on behalf of TXDOT what Texans can do for Texans, and that's take ownership of this and help us spread that message.
Okay.
You know, I've been an annoying person for TXDOT for 15 years, and I just want to say that...
Yeah, that's good, too. We need that.
Not just for TXDOT, okay?
But
I just want to...
Yeah,
okay.
TTI
Just want
also.
to... I want to make that clear.
But I will say that I've watched the leadership, and that I think under James Bass and the other executive level leadership, I am very happy with where TXDOT is, but I'm going to push for where we're going to go. And I think we have capable leadership. I think the safety messaging is exactly right. But there's a lot of hard work to do, and we need the elected officials at the state and local levels on board, and we need communities on board, and we need to keep moving forward.
Can I do one?
Okay. Well, I appreciate the panel. Let's give everybody a round of applause. Dr.
Can I
Wunderlich.
do one
Jay.
public message before we leave?
We can. Like to.
We have one public message to help support. If you all will grab your wristbands and wear them, and your bumper stickers. When people ask what it is, tell them. Tell them it's been 6,635 days since we haven't had a death on Texas roads. Please take one.
And did we have the Texas Together distributed?
They're at the
Okay.
doors. Yep.
Doors.
Yeah, a summary document of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, Texas Together on the Road to Zero, is available at the doors, and we encourage you to take one, look it over, go to the website, find out more about what you can do, and don't wait for somebody else to do something yourself.